What I want to make today is a Mediterranean style chicken pie. It's a chicken pie, but it's got a lot of spices and herbs in it. It'll have a rich, savory flavor. This should be good. I'm using 1.5 pounds, which is about 680 grams of boneless, skinless chicken meat here. This is chicken thighs and chicken drumsticks that I deboned myself. You could, if you wanted to, you could use for this. You could use a combination of white meat and dark meat. I like to work with dark meat. I like the flavor of it, so that's what I'm using here, is all dark meat. And I'm just going to chop this up into like smallish cubes like you would for a chicken pot pie. I need to chop 1 large onion here. This is about 13 ounces or 370 grams. And I'm not going to do too fine of a chop here. Because my chicken pieces aren't cut real fine. So I'm not going to do a fine dice. Just a fairly good chop, like that. I've got a skillet heating on the stove here. I'm going to put a couple of tablespoons or so of pure olive oil. This is not extra. This is just regular pure olive oil for cooking. Then I'm going to put my onions in there. And I want to saute these until they're translucent and tender. That's going to take about 10 minutes. And this is cooking over medium-high heat. While my onions are sauteing, I'm going to combine my spices here. I have 1 teaspoon of ground cinnamon, 1 teaspoon of ground ginger. This is half a teaspoon of ground turmeric. And this is about 1/8 of a teaspoon or a good pinch of saffron threads. And I broke those up with my fingers so that it was kind of ground up, broken up. My onions have been cooking now for 10 minutes. There's my spice mixture. I'm going to stir that in and then let this cook for about 1 minute. All right, my onions and spices have been cooking now for 1 minute. I'm going to add my flour. This is 1 tablespoon of all-purpose flour. So my flour now has been cooking for about 1 minute. I'm going to add 2 cups of chicken stock. You can either use homemade chicken stock or you can buy the chicken broth they sell in the store. That's 2 cups or about 475 milliliters. Then you want to just bring this to a simmer. So my liquid now has come to a simmer. You can see there's very little thickening there, virtually none from that flour, because 1 tablespoon of flour isn't going to do much as far as thickening 2 cups of stock. So what I want to do now is I want to continue simmering this to reduce this liquid down by about half, maybe even a little bit more. I'm going to need about 1 tablespoon each of fresh chopped parsley. This is Italian parsley. I'm just plucking the leaves off here. And then I'm going to need 1 tablespoon of chopped fresh basil. If you don't want to use basil, you can use cilantro. Some people really like cilantro. I'm not going to chop my herbs too fine here because I think larger flecks of herbs would look better inside the pie than just really tiny specks. All right, that's enough for the basil too. Again, I want fairly large pieces of basil, not full leaves, but I'm going to put a good sized pinch of basil in there. I want you to see my liquid now after I've concentrated that down, reduced it. That is fairly thick. So that's what I want. I did taste this for flavor. I know it's going to need salt and pepper. I'm just going to put a few gratings, fresh ground black pepper in there, and then a good pinch or so. Now I can add my chicken. I'm going to bring my heat back up here. I turned my heat off once this liquid had reduced. So now I'm going back to medium heat. And I'm going to stir my chicken in and let this start cooking. In the meantime, one of my friends here in the trailer park contacted me to say that she had some ripe lemons on her little lemon tree and would I like some to cook with. So here's one of the lemons from her lemon tree. And it gives me an excuse to use my little wood lemon juicer that I bought specifically for making videos. Beautiful. There's my lemon juice. I'm going to add that to my chicken and spice mixture when I'm ready. So returning to the chicken mixture here, this is thickened up nicely. I'm going to add my 1 tablespoon, not a tablespoon, my whole juice of 1 lemon. Stir that in, and I want to just taste that to see what that does to the flavor. I tasted it before, and it does have a nice, rich, spicy flavor to it. With the lemon juice. Oh, that's wonderful. That is just wonderful. That adds a little bit of fruitiness to the sauce. I mean, this is a Mediterranean chicken dish, so I think that's perfect. Now here is my basil and my parsley chopped. As I said, I didn't chop that too fine because I wanted nice flecks of herbs in there. I'm going to let that cook for like 30 seconds to a minute. And then finally, to finish this, I have 1.5 ounces of golden raisins that I chopped up. That's about 43 grams. So I'm going to turn the heat off. I'll cover this and set this aside. I'm going to show you how I do a nice pastry shell for a savory pie using phyllo dough. So I'm going to start off with a standard 9-inch pie plate. That's about 23 centimeters in diameter. And then I'm going to invert this onto a piece of parchment paper, and using a graphite pencil, I want to just make a nice dark line around the outside of my dish. That's going to be my guide for when I start working with my phyllo dough. After I do 1 or 2 layers of the phyllo dough, this line is going to be covered and disappear, but it'll give me a starting point. What I have here is about 1/2 cup or 2 ounces, 57 grams of chopped almonds. I actually started with whole almonds and I just cut them up myself. I'm not going to be chopping all of this. I'm going to be using about 2/3 to 3/4 because I want to save some for garnish. That should be enough. I want to save some for garnish on the top of my pie. And then I'm going to be adding a good sized pinch of salt, maybe 1/2 teaspoon, 1/4 teaspoon to 1/2 teaspoon. And then this is 1/4 teaspoon of ground cinnamon. So there it is. I reduced it down to almost a powder. It's fairly fine. That should work well. Besides sprinkling a little bit of that chopped almond mixture between the layers, I'm also going to brush the phyllo dough with a mixture of extra olive oil and my clarified butter. I keep clarified butter in the refrigerator. Clarifying butter gets rid of the water, the milk solids, all the junk that they put into butter, trying to stretch it for greater profits. And then I heated my clarified butter in the microwave. So that it would melt. I'm using both because extra olive oil does have a pretty strong flavor. I don't want the real strong flavor of olive oil. By using clarified butter, I can kind of smooth that flavor down a little bit. Phyllo dough is very thinly rolled wheat dough. It's paper thin, extremely thin, and as such it dries out very quickly. And if it dries out, it's going to break up. So what I keep in my kitchen cupboard is some spare cotton fabric that I can moisten. I'm going to wring out all the excess water, and then I'll drape this over the stack of phyllo dough to keep that stack from drying out while I'm working with it 1 sheet at a time. These packages of phyllo dough come with 2 envelopes of phyllo dough in them. A lot of recipes I've seen for making these savory pie crusts say to use 10 or 8 or 12 sheets. If you got a whole package, this is a 1 pound package, 454 grams. I'm going to use 1 envelope for the top crust and 1 envelope to the bottom crust. So I've got my template ready. I'm going to open my package of phyllo dough here. And then this is usually wrapped in a long piece of plastic. If I can find the end, there it is. And I can get rid of the excess plastic because I don't need it. It just gets in the way. And beautiful. Look at my phyllo dough. It's all nicely separated. Nothing is sticking together. That's a beautiful package. And you can see right there, it's already starting to tear and flake off. That's normal because I'm working with extremely thin layers of dough. All right, so I'm going to put 1 layer down on my sheet. If this tears while you're working with it, that's okay. Just keep going because it's not going to really matter. I'm going to cover that with a moist cloth. You can see already right here it's tearing. But again, that's okay. And you'll see why as we keep going. The beginning is always the hardest. Getting started. Because this is when you're working with the most delicate layer. I'm brushing this with my mixture of clarified butter and olive oil. And then I'm just going to put a sprinkling of my mixture on there. Bring over my end. I'm using my lines here as a guide for how big I want to make this top crust so that it fits my pie sheet. Second layer. I'm going to put this at an angle. I want to cross the grains so that by crossing the grains, hopefully I can strengthen. Well, hopefully it will. It'll strengthen this layering process because it's going to tear across each piece. But by crossing the grains, it's kind of like building up plywood. It's kind of the same effect. By crossing the grains, you're giving it strength. A little bit too much there. Again, you can see it tearing, but that's okay. And that's a train going by. Yes, folks, this is a trailer park, not a fancy house out in the Hamptons. And another piece. So you can see what I'm doing here. I'm going to build these up 1 layer at a time like this. Okay, so I got a lot of layers to go here. I'm going to keep going until I've used up all of this phyllo dough, and then I'll have a finished crust. I'm down to my last layer of phyllo dough here. And you can see how beautifully that dough stayed moist. I've used up all of my ground almonds, and you can see how I don't need to be real careful now because as soon as this sticks down with those grains crossed, it's just made so strong. that I don't have to be as delicate and careful as I was at first. Okay, so there is all of my first packet of phyllo dough. The next thing I need to do is trim this and then wrap it and set it aside until I'm ready to put my top crust on my pie. Trimming the top crust is easy. I put a cutting board down. Just going to flip that over. And then with a pair of scissors, cut in. Make sure you cut through all layers. And just cut right around. These are kitchen scissors, by the way. They are nice because they come apart. They're easy to clean. But you just use that line that you created earlier as a guide, and now it's a cutting guide. The rest of this excess can all be tossed away. All I care is about having a top crust that is roughly equal to the size of my pie plate. Actually, that's it. I'm done. I'm going to leave that on that paper, that parchment paper. I'm going to wrap this in plastic, set this aside, clean up my mess, and I'll be ready to start working on my bottom crust. I'm going to be doing the same thing for the bottom crust. I drew a line on a piece of parchment paper. The difference is that this time now, I'm not going to trim it until after I ease it into this pie plate. I have to ease it into the pie plate. I can let it overhang the edges a little bit, and then I'll trim around the edges, fill it, put my top crust on. So that part will be pretty easy. With my bottom crust now layered, I'm ready to start assembling my pie. So in the meantime, I'm heating my oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 190 degrees Celsius. I've greased my pie plate. There's my dough. I'm going to place my pie plate on top, get that centered, and then get my hand under there and just flip it over. Move that parchment paper, and then just start easing this pie shell down into my crust, like so. Down into my plate, rather. I'm not worried about the edges right now. Here is my filling. So I'm going to spoon my filling in there. Beautiful. And then just press that down inside all the way around. Distribute it evenly. Oh, that's looking beautiful already. And I have to tell you, I've tasted this filling. It is delicious. Smooth that top. That fits that 9-inch pie plate perfectly. I have a piece of Corian countertop here, scrap countertop, that I'm going to work with. I want to protect my wood surface. So there's my top crust. And what you need to do is cut some vents into this, some steam vents. I'm actually going to cut some holes because I have this set of cork drills. And I can use these to cut nice holes in my top crust. And that'll give it a nice look. Like so. I've also prepared an egg wash here by mixing 1 egg with about a teaspoon or 2 of water. And I'm just going to paint this around the edge for sealing. like so. Okay, take my top crust, remove my paper. This bottom part doesn't have any fat on it the way this top part does. The top part was buttered. So I'm going to put the dry, unbuttered part against the egg and then press that down in. Okay, get a little knife out and then start cutting around the edge. This top crust is going to flake up around the top edge. I know that when it bakes, but I don't care. It'll just add to the appearance. Get this out of the way. All right, now that my crust is in place, my top crust, once again, with my egg wash, I'm going to brush the whole top of this pie with egg wash. And I'm thinking I might even dab some around the edge to try to help seal those edges so that they won't flake up too much. They're going to flake up, but hopefully putting some egg along that edge will help. Okay. Top is nicely covered with egg wash. And then this is the last of my almonds that I had set aside earlier to give me a nice finished look to my top. All right, that is ready to go into the oven. Everything is cooked inside there other than the shell. So really I only need to heat this all the way through, and that's going to take about 40 minutes. Okay, check this out. Isn't that beautiful? There it is, fresh from the oven. It baked for 40 minutes. I'm not seeing any liquid stream up out of the holes, and nothing came out of the sides. That's a good indication that I got that sauce really thickened down well before I put it inside of the pie shell. And how well can I show you this? Let me see if I can show you this. See the edges? It did flake up a little bit, but that gives me a pretty edge, so I have no problems at all with that. So now I'm going to let this cool for about 15 minutes. I don't really want to cool it down. I just want it to be set so that I can cut into it. So there it is. I cut a nice slice for myself. Oh, I so want to taste this. Oh, it looks so good. Nice savory flavor. I want you to hear the crunch. Can you hear the crunch of that crust? The crust is crisp and delicate. It tastes a little bit of the raisins, but see, I'm glad my neighbor suggested that I pick up some lemons, because the lemons just add a nice fruity flavor to that. That is so good. 3:45. I don't know whether I'm having an early lunch, a late lunch, or an early dinner. Whatever. I'm going to go enjoy my Mediterranean chicken pie. To view the recipe and download a PDF version with step-by-step photographs, click the Jump to Recipe icon in the lower right corner or visit my website, mobilehomegourmet.com.